Hello, Nutrition 160 students, and welcome to Chapter 6, Protein, Amino Acids. And I like the images that I put here because a lot of us think of proteins coming from mainly meat sources and eggs, but they're also found in plenty of plant-based foods like legumes, which are things in pods, like peas, soybeans, beans, multiple types of beans, also in nuts and seeds. The chemist's view of proteins. So proteins contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like fats and carbs. But the different thing, they contain an element that carbs and fats, and that is nitrogen. And because of the nitrogen, proteins differ pretty significantly from fats and carbohydrates chemically. Again, because of that nitrogen component. And again, amino acids contain hydrogen. So when we take a look at the chemistry of amino acid, there are 20 amino acids that combine together to form big proteins in foods and in the body. But when we look at a single amino acid, which is the smallest building unit of a protein, some things that they have in common are the carbon in the middle and the hydrogen attached to the carbon. They also have an amino group, also called the nitrogen group or the amine group. They also have a carboxyl end or a carboxylic acid end, also referred to as the acid group. And then on the top, they have a side group called the R group or a side chain group, and that's where they differ. So that R group or side group can be hydrogen, it can be methyl, it could be different things, and that is what identifies an amino acid from another one. So there are two types, I should say there may be three types, but two main types of amino acids. So there are 20 amino acids total that make proteins. 11 are non-essential, while 9 are essential. Another name for non-essential means that they're dispensable amino acids. That means the body can produce them in sufficient amounts to maintain bodily functions, considering that you are getting adequate amounts of protein every day, so we can make some amino acids from others. Essential ones are also referred to as indispensable amino acids. Again, they're not dispensable, they're indispensable. You cannot replace them through other ones or make them through other ones, so you must obtain them from the diet or taken via food. Now, some of those non-essential amino acids, again, considering that you have a healthy amount of protein every day to make other ones in the body, sometimes the non-essential ones, you're unable to make them in the body because you're going through something like maybe you've had major heart surgery or major knee replacement surgery and you're losing so much protein, or you just have a very poor diet and you don't get the good amount of protein every day. So your body might not be able to produce non-essential or dispensable ones. So what happens is they become essential conditionally or temporarily, and we call that conditionally essential amino acids. And that can happen during infancy because the liver helps make a lot of these non-essential amino acids and infants don't have the capability yet. Also disease or trauma, just like I mentioned earlier, you have a very poor diet or you have some kind of disease or some kind of procedure that you've had done where you lose a lot of protein. An example is glutamine. Glutamine is a non-essential amino acid, and glutamine is often conditionally essential with athletes in general because there's a high need for them when we take a look at how they use their muscles, especially those athletes with high volume training regimens. So for them, some of them, those non-essential amino acids might be conditionally essential while they're training. Also, if you've gone again through open heart surgery, total knee replacement surgery, you're losing so much protein to the point where some of these non-essential amino acids have become conditionally essential, and glutamine is often prescribed in patients that lose a lot of protein through some type of procedure in the hospital setting or clinical setting in order to help decrease hospital stay and increase protein regeneration post-surgery. Now your book lists the names of the essential amino acids and the non-essential ones. You don't have to know their actual names. I do want you to know, however, that if you ever heard of branched chain amino acids or BCAAs, they are the following essential amino acids: isoleucine, leucine, and valine. And those are different because they're branched compared to the other ones. And because they're branched, they act differently and they serve different purposes in the body. And that is, they have the ability to metabolize directly into the cell. So a lot of athletes will use them pre-workout, during workout, and post-workout because it helps absorb faster into the muscle. It has the ability to. And it has anabolic effects or energy effects as well. Another thing is there's something called the central fatigue that happens during exercise, where the brain communicates to the muscles to cease exercise because it's physiological effect to protect you, and also it means that you cannot perform at your peak anymore. So BCAAs, or branched chain amino acids, have also been shown to decrease the central fatigue effect, or delay it, so that you can work out and get another few reps in or last a little longer. Examples of amino acids are glycine, alanine, aspartic acid, and phenylalanine. And as you see here at the top in white, that's the side chain or R chain, and that differs, okay? So for glycine, it's a hydrogen; for alanine, it's a methyl, and so on. But everything else is pretty much the same: the carbon, the nitrogen group, or the amino group, and the carboxylic end, and the hydrogen at the bottom. Now, proteins are made of amino acids, the building blocks, and the chemical bonds that these amino acids have. Now, amino acids are also called peptides, in case I say peptides. So these peptides or amino acids are bonded by a type of alpha bond called peptide bonds. And again, we build amino acids through condensation reactions, which requires water as well. Amino acid sequencing, I want you to know those different types of structures that occur when we make proteins. It starts with their primary structure, and it goes on to be a tertiary and quaternary structure. And as you see here, as we go down the list, these more complicated structures have hydrophilic and hydrophobic components as well, because sometimes they need to be a little bit more rigid in order to have structure and stability. And they can also keep winding to become quaternary structures of 2 or more polypeptides that are intertwined and they fold. An example of a quaternary structure is hemoglobin. It is a blood protein that is quite complex, and its quaternary structure allows for it to be globular and three-dimensional and have multiple sites to allow oxygen to bond, because it's the blood protein that delivers oxygen to your blood tissues or your cells. Now, insulin is also made from protein. So I want to let you know that almost everything in your body has a protein influence. It's like water. So protein is as ubiquitous as water in the human body. Hormones are made for proteins. Digestive enzymes are made for protein. Your digestive system is made for protein. A lot of the lining of your organs are made for protein. Your hair, your nails, your skin, you got it. So here's an example of a hormone made from protein. We talked about insulin in the last 2 chapters in carbohydrates. So it's a tertiary structure, and it contains 2 polypeptides that are bonded by these disulfide bridges or disulfide bonds. The structure of hemoglobin, like I said here, it's the shape of each polypeptide chain in the hemoglobin structure is determined by an amino acid sequence. It starts with the primary, and then it goes on to be a quaternary, and it will fold and bend eventually as it gets more complicated into that quaternary structure. And everything is regulated in the body through this DNA synthesis process. And this DNA synthesis process tells your body exactly how to make proteins in a certain genetic sequence. So protein digestion, we went over it in the digestion and absorption chapter. Make sure you revisit that. But this is, again, I'm doing some review right now. Again, refer back to your chapter 3 notes. But there's no enzyme in the mouth to digest protein other than the mechanical action of mastication or the teeth. In the stomach, we have a hormone found in the stomach walls called gastrin, and it's secreted by these parietal cells located in the stomach, and they tell the stomach walls to secrete hydrochloric acid. And hydrochloric acid denatures proteins from foods. Denaturation just means that it unravels or unwinds the structure of protein so it's more simple and exposed to the digestive juices of the stomach. And when we denature protein, you've probably done it when you cooked an egg. You have changed the proteins, you've denatured them, unraveled the shape. And denaturing a protein also means that you've changed the biological function of the protein and the shape. Chief cells, what happens next is once the protein is unraveled by hydrochloric acid, next the chief cells of the stomach secrete this enzyme called pepsinogen, which is converted to pepsin. And this is the first enzyme we see that digests protein. So this is the first sign of enzymatic digestion or chemical digestion for protein. It's in the stomach through pepsin. Again, we store some enzymes in the body in inactive forms because it can erode the walls if they were activated all the time. So pepsinogen is just the inactive form of pepsin, and it's converted to pepsin just with the presence of hydrochloric acid. Then in the small intestine, there's hydrolysis reactions occurs in which it breaks up any type of polypeptides or dipeptides into single peptides. And there's different types of enzymes. So these hydrolysis reactions are initiated by the pancreas, which creates pancreatic proteases, which are a group of enzymes that digest proteins. An example is chymotrypsin and trypsin. And then we act on these polypeptides to make them into like tripeptides and dipeptides. Lastly, the small intestinal walls contain their own enzymes called peptidases, which makes these dipeptides into single peptides or amino acids. And then the fate of pepsin, the reason why I put that here is because when the small intestine receives food from the stomach, the food contains pepsin in it, and it will inactivate pepsin in order to make the food less acidic, okay? And we do that with bicarbonate that comes via the pancreas that's injected into the small intestine to neutralize the pepsin. So this is just to depict that your book has a great image about protein digestion. You should review it definitely for the test. It's a flashcard. Let's talk about the roles of protein and DNA. If you've ever heard of DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, it is made from proteins, specific sequencing. Again, everyone's physical characteristics as well as other physical characteristics that you possess as a human being are made from genetic sequencing, which we call your DNA. And I want you to know that your diet, if you are not an active person, this is not considering daily activity. So just for an average person, adult, the calculation states that for every kilogram that you weigh, you need 0.8 grams of protein. The way you figure out how much you weigh in kilograms, you guys, so 1 kilogram equals 2.2 pounds. So a kilogram is bigger than a pound. So I just want you to know, just as a general rule of thumb, if you take the amount you weigh in pounds, so whatever it is that you weigh in pounds, divide it by 2.2, and you will get what you weigh in kilograms. After you get what you weigh in kilograms, you're going to times it by 0.8. And I will have a calculation also on the learning unit so you can see it visually. Okay, but I want to let you know that as Americans, we get more than what we need every day. Again, athletes might need more protein. They usually start at 1 gram per kilogram and go up to as high as 2.2. It's important to get adequate protein and also focus on those essential amino acids, those 9. Now I'm going to go over how proteins are made in the body. We call it protein synthesis. There are 2 main phases. We have a transcription phase, which happens first, and a translation phase. So a little background is transcription is the first part, again, of molecular biology. And it is the transfer of genetic instructions in the DNA to a protein called a messenger RNA. Now, so this first step, or this first phase called transcription, this messenger RNA or this protein goes into the nucleus of the cell. and extracts DNA strands, which contains the instructions on how to make a new protein so that we can make a new cell. Now, during transcription, again, a strand of mRNA or messenger RNA, this protein, is made to complement a strand of DNA. Okay. Again, there's different phases. You don't have to know each one, but there's an initiation phase, which begins it. It occurs when this enzyme called polymerase binds to a region. But there's also an elongation phase as well and a termination phase. But all I want you to know is transcription includes this protein messenger RNA goes into the nucleus of the cell, of a cell. If, for instance, if you want to act like we're trying to make a muscle cell, it will take the DNA strands of a muscle cell's nucleus, and what it'll do is it will take the instructions of that DNA found in the nucleus, and that's the messenger RNA that is doing it, and that is called transcription. Now, this messenger RNA will also process the information on how to make this protein cell to the ribosomes. Now, the first part that I explained is transcription phase, where messenger RNA extracts the strands of the DNA from the nucleus. That happens in the cytoplasm or the cytosol. Now, what happens next is this messenger RNA will also go eventually to the ribosomes of the cell, and it will meet with another protein called tRNA. And tRNA, just so you know, stands for transfer RNA. It's another protein. And this transfer RNA will work together with the mRNA in the ribosomes in order to put together the correct sequence of amino acids to form proteins. Now, to understand the role of tRNA, or this transfer RNA, you need to know more about its structure. And all I want you to know is this tRNA molecule has an anticodon that we call for the amino acid it carries. And an anticodon is complementary to the codon for an amino acid. I'm going to give you an example. So the amino acid lysine has a codon called AAG. So the anticodon is UUC. Therefore, I want you to know that lysine would be carried by a tRNA molecule with the anticodon UUC. Now, wherever the codon AAG appears in the messenger RNA, a UUC anticodon of tRNA temporarily binds. Also, while bound to messenger RNA, the transfer tRNA gives up its amino acid. Now, I'm going to stop right there. It was a little detailed, but the translation phase is basically when this messenger RNA gives the instructions to the transfer RNA protein molecule, and together they form the sequencing, or put together the sequencing of the amino acids to form a particular protein. Okay. Now, what happens when the sequencing goes wrong? As we can get genetic mutations, such as in sickle cell disease, which is a blood disorder often seen in African Americans. So a normal red blood cell looks nice and plump and circular, as you see here, whereas a genetic mutated one and sickle cell blood disorder, it's a half crescent shape like. And as you see here in red, in the sickle cell hemoglobin, the sequencing of an amino acid has been replaced with valine and caused the sickle cell disease. Proteins as structural materials and enzymes. Again, I told you that proteins are found throughout the body, almost everywhere. It's as ubiquitous as water. Building blocks for most body structures. It has a collagen matrix as well, and forms a lot of the collagen and connective tissue in our body structure, which is filled with mineral crystals for bones or teeth. The replacement of dead or damaged cells as well. So our protein cells in the body have a certain cell turnover, which some of them die within a few days, some with weeks, some in months, and they have to be replaced by new ones. Enzymes, our digestive enzymes, are made from proteins. So the amylase, the lipases, the proteases. So you need digestive enzymes made from proteins to break down proteins and other macronutrients. They build up and transform substances, and some enzymes form as catalysts to speed up reactions and allow reactions to happen. Roles of protein, again, furthermore, they're certain hormones are made from protein, and certain neurotransmitters in the brain, which are chemical substances made in the brain, involved in a lot of crucial functions in the body, are made from proteins. An example of a neurotransmitter in the brain is made from proteins is called serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that modulates mood as far in the human body, makes us feel calm and relaxed. A lot of people that are clinically depressed sometimes will be prescribed serotonin pills because, again, it's a neurotransmitter that modulates mood and makes us feel calm and relaxed. And it's made from a protein or amino acid called tryptophan. Also, certain proteins regulate fluid balance in the body. If it sees at any time that excess fluid outside the body tissues called edema, it will regulate it and bring it back into the bloodstream in order to get rid of it and regulate it. So sometimes if we lack proteins, we will lack the ability to monitor this edema that can happen from inflammation and trauma in the body. They also serve as buffers. Acid-base regulators. They will attract hydrogens and act again as buffers to neutralize the pH in our body. And some of them also are proteins are transporters. So in order to transport and absorb nutrients, some nutrients need a protein transport to be absorbed into the blood, into the small intestinal cells and the blood and tissues. So they make up certain protein transporters that allow nutrients to be absorbed into our tissues and into the small intestinal wall. Examples of hormones and their actions that are made from protein. So this is straight from your book. I do want you to know insulin and glucagon because they regulate blood glucose, and we talked about it in chapter 4, but they regulate glucose level in the blood, and they're made from proteins. And insulin has a tertiary structure again. An example of a transport protein, so it's showing here that sodium and potassium. The transport protein picks up sodium from inside the cell, and then the protein changes the shape and releases sodium outside of the cell. So many of you have learned about the sodium-potassium pump in cells. And so just so you know, when the pump is working and is allowing these protein receptors to open and close as the electrolytes flow in and out of the cells, those proteins that are found on the cell membrane are the protein transporters. Proteins also serve as antibodies. They make antibodies in our immune system. Antibodies means against something, and these antibodies are usually a defense of the immune system to defend the body against a disease or some kind of inflammatory reaction. Now, the process begins with an antigen. An antigen is actually a toxin or a foreign substance which induces an immune response in the body. And the response is to produce antibodies made from proteins. And some people, some doctors also, for instance, in thyroid diseases like hypothyroidism and hypothyroidism, they will measure the amount of antibodies to see if your body is producing a lot of them. And that usually is an indication that there's something going on with the body. Now, specificity, just I want you to know, like the coronavirus that is going on right now, the body does have an adaptive mechanism in which sometimes when you contract a certain disease or condition, it will develop sufficient antibodies in the future so that you don't get ill again, or that it's treated right away by the immune system. It's also a source of energy. And some amino acids, based on their carbon skeleton, are considered glucogenic. Those that are considered glucogenic can become glucose as a source of energy, but again, we don't want to do that. We'd rather use our protein for building, repairing, and maintaining structures other than direct energy sources. We'd rather use carbohydrates and fats. If you starve yourself or you have insufficient amounts of carbohydrate intake, you can start to use amino acids that are glucogenic as a form of sugar, glucose or sugar supply. Again, we don't want to do that. We want to combat that as much as we can because protein is important for other functions. And that is called gluconeogenesis. Gluco means glucose. Neo means new. Genesis means the making of glucose from other substances, such as proteins in this case. Also, some proteins are involved in making hormones that help some blood clotting factors, and also for vision. So your eyeballs are made from protein. So all the components of your eyes, many components of the eye, again, are made from protein. Also, a lot of the little vision rods that we have these little rods in our eyes responsible for helping us see certain colors, and so under also low lights and highlights, different types of lighting, and those rods in the eyes are also made from protein as well. So other uses for amino acids, let's take a look at the central nervous system. I mentioned earlier that we can make certain neurotransmitters, which are made in the brain. We can make them through certain amino acids. So tyrosine and tryptophan, for example, are amino acids that can be converted to neurotransmitters in the brain. And you guys, neurotransmitters are often referred to as the body's chemical messengers. Again, they're made in the brain. And they are the molecules that are used by our nervous system to transmit messages between nerves or neurons, or from neurons to muscles, again, so they communicate with their body to generate electrical impulses so that we can carry out certain functions. And energy and glucose. Again, we don't want to use amino acids as a source of energy. We'd rather use carbs and fats for that because they contribute to many other functions. But I want you to know that protein contributes to about 10 to 15% of energy needs, and possibly more with energy restriction. Okay, so again, the ketogenic diet is huge right now, in which it constricts carbohydrates immensely compared to a normal, healthy, balanced diet that is approved through research. And so a lot of those people can be using protein as a source of energy for the cells of their body. Again, starvation or fasting causes lean tissue wasting. So you can, just so you know, your body is very efficient at targeting your muscles first when you don't have enough energy or glucose in the body from carbohydrates or from fats or just carbs alone. So it likes to target the muscles because your body's very good, very efficient at making energy from muscles. And so a lot of us want to keep our muscles, again, because muscles have a lot, skeletal muscle has a lot of functions in the body. It provides structure, functionality. And if you're an athlete, you definitely want to keep your muscles as well. So having an adequate amount of fats, especially carbohydrates. Carbohydrates actually spare proteins from being used as direct energy or glucose. Not all amino acids are glucogenic. Again, other amino acids based on their carbon scales are ketogenic, and those cannot become energy, cannot become glucose. Rather, they become another source of energy for the cells, but not via glucose. This slide right here is an example of some processes with amino acids. So this is an example of deamination and synthesis of a non-essential amino acid. So when an amino acid is not going to be used immediately to synthesize or make a protein in the body, it will be deaminated, and that is when the nitrogen group or the amino group is converted to ammonia, and then this NH3 or ammonia will later be converted to a component of urine called urea. Now, if we're going to make proteins in the body, what happens to that amino acid is we'll take the keto acid, which can also have been from a previous amino acid that was deaminated, and this keto acid, which no longer has the nitrogen group, will gain a nitrogen group. And by gaining that nitrogen group, it will help build protein. So again, and that's called transamination. So I forgot to mention that deamination means you're not going to use the amino acid to make something at the moment. So you will deaminate or get rid of the nitrogen or amino group, and it'll become amino acid and then urea in the urine. And then if you need to make or synthesize a protein, that keto acid that was stored in the body will gain a nitrogen or amino group, and that'll help it build proteins. Transamination, so here's an example of transamination, is when you make proteins in the body. It goes through a process called transamination. in which you gain a amino acid group, okay, in order to form or complete the protein. And this is just in regards to how you make non-essential amino acids in the body. So you will store a carbon skeleton that is ketogenic in the body, and then eventually it will gain an amino or nitrogen group and help build it up to make eventually the amino acid. The body can transfer again amino acids, the NH2 nitrogen group from an amino acid to a keto one, forming a non-essential amino acid and a new keto acid. This transamination reaction requires the vitamin B6 coenzyme. So you do need some B vitamins that are involved in chemical reactions. Urea synthesis, so again, when you deaminate an amino acid, the ammonia becomes a component in the urine called urea. Excreting urea, so effect on liver disease, effect of kidney. So I want you to know that the more protein that you ingest, you need to increase waters because protein requires water to digest. So oftentimes in high protein diets, you can become dehydrated. Also constipated. We found that a lot of people on high protein diets also don't get enough fiber in their diet as well. Also, protein may affect in very high amounts for a prolonged period of time. This is rare in the US. We often see it in these extreme athletes that are focused on protein, such as bodybuilders, for example. It may affect the kidneys and liver because they are involved in converting the nitrogen group or amino group into ammonia and the urea, okay? And I talked about protein intake and urea production. You need to increase your water intake if you increase protein intake. Now, protein functions in the body. You guys, please review this in your book. This is straight from your book. You do need to know the functions and roles of proteins in the body, and I went over some. But again, your book has some as well, and it has it in a nice table format. Now, the complementary rule for proteins, often we apply it for vegetarians. And again, there's different types of vegetarians. Let's review them. So people that just say they're in general just a vegetarian, it's a little bit more of a loose term. It usually means that they might be incorporating some animal products like eggs and fish and dairy products, but are focused on eliminating red meats like pork and beef. We also have, for example, lacto-vegetarians, which is the only type of animal product they include are dairy and milk products, and plant products as well, but eliminating all animal products but dairy and milk. Ovo-vegetarians only eat eggs in regards to animal products. Lacto-ovo-vegetarians allow milk and dairy products and eggs. Everything else of animal origin is eliminated. A pescatarian or a pescatarian will only allow fish from as far as a food source from animal origin. And also we have a raw diet vegan and a just vegan. A vegan is the strictest type of vegetarian. Vegans do not consume anything of animal origin. Sometimes they even eliminate honey because it's made from bees. And a raw vegetarian, raw food vegetarian, is the same as a vegan. It's just that they believe in consuming a plant-based, strict plant-based diet that is raw because they believe it comes best in that raw, whole form. There's also something called a flexitarian. And a flexitarian is someone, which I kind of fall into that category, is that we will focus mainly on plant-based foods and we will have our meat sporadically. We might crave meat here and there, but not very often. Flexitarians, there's different types too. Some of them will allow certain types of animal products like eggs to be staples, and then maybe sporadically eat red meat. And then some of them will be strict vegans for a while and maybe allow a little bit of animal products just for a little bit and then go back to a strict vegan diet. So here's an example of why we use the complementary rules of proteins for vegetarians. Because plant proteins do lack one or more of the essential amino acids, and if they're lacking it, we have to complement them with another plant protein that does have it to make it complete. So before I go into this, you guys, soy and quinoa are an exception. Now, I want you to know that your high quality proteins are considered your animal proteins, and that is because they have the 9 essential amino acids in sufficient amounts to support your body's roles and functions, and sometimes a little bit more. And soy and quinoa also are similar to animal proteins, that they have the 9 essential amino acids in adequate amounts to support your health and your bodily functions. Now, low quality or protein sources include most of your plant-based proteins like grains and legumes and nuts and seeds. They are limited in one or more of the essential amino acids, and therefore might find another plant protein to complement it to form a whole one. For example, legumes lack isoleucine and lysine. Grains lack methionine and tryptophan. But if you combine a legume, just like you see here in this picture, like black beans with a grain like rice, you will have formed a complete protein. So complete proteins are also considered high quality proteins, which are example all your animal proteins except gelatin. They provide again the adequate amounts of all essential amino acids, all 9 of them, sometimes a little bit more. Incomplete proteins or low quality proteins or include your plant-based proteins, with the exception to quinoa and soybeans. They are inadequate or limited in one or more of the essential amino acids, therefore might find another plant-based protein to complement it to form a complete one. And again, I have here except soybeans, but also quinoa. Quinoa is a pseudo grain. It's grown and harvested similar like any other grain like rice and wheat. However, it's called the pseudo grain because the fact that it's a complete or high quality protein similar to animal proteins. Okay, it has a different protein profile. Now again, complementary proteins combining plant proteins to compensate for limiting the limited amino acid of one. So here's an example of another textbook, but I love it. It will help you for the test because I will have examples of vegetarian types. And also I might have some meals that you have to choose from that form a complete protein. So this will help you a lot. So for example, legumes such as peanuts and dry beans, they lack methionine and tryptophan. So if you combine it with a grain, a nut, or a seed, you will form a complete protein. Nuts and seeds and also grains lack lysine, so if you combine them with the legume, you will have made a complete protein. So I have examples here of foods, of actual foods or actual meals that if you eat them will form a complete protein. And a lot of us have already eaten like this in different cultures. We innately do it, but it's just to know that maybe we did it innately because we knew we needed complete proteins. And lastly, some guidelines to groceries. So some guidelines that you can incorporate into your life. Protein foods, I want you to know serving size wise, 1 ounce delivers about 7 grams of protein. The United States Department of Agriculture Food Patterns recommends that you have some meatless meals sometimes, and that we all need more plant proteins such as beans and legumes, nuts and seeds into our diets. Okay. They do recommend that if you eat meats, you choose leaner sources like the breast, like turkey breast or chicken breast, which has less saturated fat, and also removing the skin from your meats and chicken. And if you do eat red meat, maybe considering some lower, leaner versions of that. Milk and milk products, they recommend that you choose reduced fat versions. Fruits, vegetables, and grains. Again, whole grains can actually contribute a good amount of protein, but not as good as animal products and milk products, but you can get a good amount as a vegetarian. And also some vegetables such as broccoli, cauliflower, can have trace amounts, and corn can have some trace amounts of protein that can complement some other products as well. Also vegetables, the legumes and beans are the highest. And also read food labels in order to see how much protein foods have and where they're coming from in the ingredient list. Okay. Current United States intakes, I want you to know that we get more than the protein that we need daily. I do want you to know that if you get more than double what you need, you should consider decreasing it, because if you get more than double than what you need, that's considered too high of a protein intake, okay?